There's something strange about how heart disease develops. Most people imagine arteries slowly clogging over time, fat building up like grease inside a pipe, thick, visible, obvious. But when you actually look at what's happening inside the body, that's not where it begins. It doesn't start with blockage. It starts with something much quieter, something almost invisible, a kind of friction between your biology and your environment. And that friction builds slowly, so slowly that you don't notice it, until the system is already under stress. What's more unsettling is that many of the things contributing to this friction don't look dangerous at all. In fact, they look normal. Some are even considered healthy, which raises a deeper question. What if the issue isn't just what you eat, but what your body is being asked to process in a world it was never designed for? Because when people talk about heart health, the conversation usually revolves around numbers, cholesterol levels, blood pressure, genetics, as if the body is a static system that simply accumulates damage. But the body isn't static. It's responsive, constantly adjusting, constantly reacting to signals. The inner lining of your arteries, known as the endothelium, isn't just a surface. It's a living interface. It senses changes in blood flow, nutrients, stress hormones, inflammatory signals, and it responds. It maintains balance when it can, and initiates repair when it has to. This is where things begin to shift, because repair is not the same as restoration. Repair often involves trade-offs, temporary fixes, structural adjustments, ways of stabilizing damage instead of removing its cause. Over time, those adjustments can begin to look like disease, even though they started as protection. So instead of asking what clogs arteries, a more useful question might be this: what repeatedly irritates them? What disrupts their environment? What pushes the system into a state where repair becomes constant? When you start looking at it this way, the picture changes. It becomes less about a single villain and more about patterns. Patterns of exposure, patterns of processing, patterns of living. One of those patterns that has quietly become embedded in modern diets is the widespread use of industrially processed oils. Not occasionally, not in small amounts, but continuously, across meals, across days, across years, often without awareness. Because they don't appear unusual, they're neutral, invisible, blended into foods that feel convenient, accessible, even responsible. But from a biological perspective, these oils represent something relatively new, not just in their existence, but in their concentration, in how they're extracted, refined, heated, stored, and reused. The human body can adapt, but it doesn't always respond optimally to constant novelty, especially when that novelty interacts with fragile biological structures. Many of these oils are high in polyunsaturated fatty acids. Structurally, they are more prone to oxidation, especially when exposed to heat, light, and oxygen. Oxidation itself is not the problem. It's part of normal metabolism, but context matters. When oxidation happens excessively or in the wrong place, it can create molecules that behave differently, molecules that the body doesn't always interpret as neutral. And this becomes relevant when those molecules enter circulation, because they don't just float passively. They integrate into lipoproteins, the particles that transport fats through your bloodstream. Under certain conditions, these particles can become altered, not dramatically, subtly, but enough to change how they're recognized. Instead of moving quietly through the system, they begin to attract attention. The immune system responds, not aggressively at first, just cautiously. Inflammation begins, not as a failure, but as a form of communication, a signal that something is slightly off. Over time, repeated exposure can turn that signal into a pattern, and patterns are what shape structure. Inside the arterial wall, immune cells begin interacting with these altered particles. They attempt to process them, contain them, adapt to them. But in doing so, they can accumulate, transform, become something else entirely. This is where early plaque formation begins, not from a single event, but from repeated interaction, repeated response, repeated adaptation. Now layer in the modern environment, because this process does not happen in isolation. It happens in a body that is often under constant input, eating frequently, sleeping irregularly, experiencing chronic stress, moving less. Each of these factors influences how the body processes what it receives. Digestion is not just mechanical. It's regulated by the nervous system, by circadian rhythms, by the balance between activation and recovery. When that balance is disrupted, processing changes. Nutrients are handled differently. Signals are amplified, or muted, in ways that may not align with the body's original design. So, a substance that might be manageable under one condition may contribute to strain under another, not because it is inherently harmful, but because the system receiving it is already under pressure. This is the idea of cumulative load, the total burden placed on biological systems over time. When that load exceeds the system's ability to maintain balance, subtle changes begin to appear. Changes in energy, in focus, in resilience. Eventually, in structure, including the cardiovascular system. This is why the idea of one food clogging arteries is incomplete. It simplifies a deeply interconnected process. What we may actually be seeing is the result of a broader mismatch between modern inputs and ancient regulatory systems. And this mismatch doesn't just affect the arteries, it echoes across the body. The gut, where fats are broken down and absorbed, is influenced by the same variables: stress, microbial balance, timing. When digestion is inconsistent, the byproducts entering circulation can change, which influences inflammation and metabolic signaling. The brain is also affected. It depends on stable energy and balanced signaling. When these systems fluctuate, cognitive function can shift, mood can shift, perception of stress can shift. This creates feedback loops, where physiological strain influences behavior, and behavior reinforces the original strain. Over time, this loop becomes normalized, not because it is optimal, but because it is consistent. And consistency, even in imbalance, can feel like stability. This may be one of the most subtle aspects of modern health decline. Not dramatic symptoms, but a gradual narrowing of what feels normal. Low energy becomes expected. Mild inflammation becomes invisible. Reduced resilience becomes standard. Within this context, heart health is not just about avoiding certain foods. It's about recognizing patterns the body may be struggling to process. Patterns of constant exposure, constant stimulation, constant adaptation. This perspective doesn't offer simple answers, but it offers something more useful, a shift in how the problem is seen. The body is not failing, it is adapting, continuously, intelligently, but not always optimally under modern conditions. And so the state of your arteries may not be the result of a single decision, but the expression of a long conversation between your biology and your environment. A conversation shaped by repetition, by rhythm, by what is considered normal and what is not. That conversation is still ongoing, still responsive, still capable of shifting, which means the real question is not just what you are eating, but what patterns are being reinforced, what signals are being repeated, and what kind of environment your body is being asked to interpret. Because in the end, what appears as damage may actually be adaptation, and what appears as normal may simply be familiar.